Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska, where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started. What's good, Alaska? This is Scott Levesque, and you're listening to the Daily Dose of the Must Read Alaska podcast. Listen, everybody, I have been a little bit away. We've had some things going on personally, but I'm glad to be back. And let me tell you, we are not short of stories today to talk about. And because of that, I have our fearless leader, Suzanne Downing, here with me. Suzanne, how are you doing?
It has been an amazing week. There is so much news going on, and I know we're not going to get to it all. We're going to get to a few of the big pieces, but everybody can always catch up on mustreadalaska.com and see what else is going on.
Absolutely. And I want everybody to know we got a new thing. Every story we talk about here on the podcast will be linked in the show notes. So if you want to go directly to that story, because I reference a lot of those stories, you can find them all in the show notes. Also, guys, you killed it. We're at 172, how would we say, 5-star reviews, I guess I would say. I mean, they're not all 5-star, but most of them are. Thank you, guys. 172. We are cooking to 200. I just want to say thank you. I'm not going to go ahead and plug it. I just want to say, man, you guys were awesome. And we're well on our way to ranking higher and higher. So thank you, guys. But today, Suzanne, let's get into it. The breaking story of today, the Supreme Court essentially has nixed the Biden COVID vaccine mandate. And we need to, there's nuance to this, of course, but really when it comes to the Biden mandate for organizations or companies with over 100 employees that would either have to mandate vaccines or do weekly testing, that has been, that there's a hold on that. There's a stay on that right now.
No, it was actually just absolutely voted down for the large companies with 100 employees or more. There's no stay. That is just voted down. That thing is done. Yeah, that was on a yeah, and basically it is if you're one of the large companies in Alaska and you don't want to mandate vaccines for COVID vaccines for your employees, the federal government cannot have OSHA. The Biden administration was way overstepping its boundaries, as you all knew that they were. To force OSHA or to make OSHA the authority of that. And it was really interesting what they wrote. If you go to the story at mustreadalaska.com, you will see the kinds of things that they said. Things like the Solicitor General, who was the one who defended Biden's position, argued that the risk of contracting COVID qualifies as such a danger, like a huge occupational danger. And the court writes, we cannot agree. It's a risk, but there are other risks too. There are risks at schools. There are risks on buses in communities. There's also risks like Scott, like they mentioned air pollution and crime or communicable diseases. I mean, like gonorrhea or something. They mentioned there were lots of the different risks that OSHA doesn't have the regulatory authority over, and that they just went too far. Now, you know that this did not apply to the other case. There were two cases. So they did agree that healthcare workers could be mandated to either vaccinate or test and mask. Test and mask is the key there. So anyways, really interesting case day in the Supreme Court. As we knew, these things were argued last week. It were argued for over 4 hours in front of the Supreme Court. It was a very historic day.
Big deal. Absolutely. And I think it's a victory for freedom and personal choice. Number one, a couple of nuanced things to that. I'm glad that you said that in terms of it struck down. Here's the thing. When you looked at what the Supreme Court said, I found very fascinating. And I'm going to try to do layman's terms here, and you can help me massage this a little bit here, Suzanne. But essentially it was the scope of OSHA in this particular mandate goes beyond, because the court said you can get it at home, you can get it at schools. It's not just relegated to the workplace. And so most
people getting it at home, right?
Correct. So the scope of that is so broad and beyond their reach that was sort of a complaint, which I thought was interesting. And a lot of people, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that when this was going on. The other thing I find really, really interesting is the fact of what is considered a healthcare worker and how does that apply? So the actual mandate that went through, are we just talking practicing individuals like CNAs, nurses, surgical techs, doctors? Or if you're a part of the administration or non-healthcare working side, like a marketer, philanthropy, a CEO, whatever it may be, are you now lumped into healthcare worker? Other words, is it the location that you're considered a healthcare worker, or is it an actual job function that you're considered a healthcare worker?
Well, so this particular case was Biden versus Missouri, and they basically they said that Medicare and Medicaid do have the authority as federal agencies to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, that is the CMS, has the authority over hospitals and any kind of clinics or doctor's offices where they reimburse federal dollars to them. So if you're like a concierge doctor and you're just one of these doctors that caters to the wealthy and you don't take Medicare or Medicaid, this does not apply to you. But if you take federal dollars, then they're saying that the Department of Health and Human Services can actually oversee this. So it's not OSHA, it's DHHS that actually oversees this. And they're saying it fits in their power because they're giving you money.
So is that a slippery slope in my mind to those who actually receive Medicare or Medicaid, that they would actually have the authority to enforce mandated vaccinations to those who are actually receiving care from these programs?
Well, it doesn't. And actually, Justice Clarence Thomas, he actually filed a dissenting opinion, and that was joined by Alito and Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett. And he basically argued that this actually grants HHS unlimited vaccination power over all healthcare workers. In other words, it can be everything. We could have you say you're going to have to be vaccinated for shingles if you are a healthcare worker and you receive federal. If your organization receives federal money, you're going to have to be vaccinated against any vaccine that comes along. They can mandate, and they're right. Using that argument, it does give the federal government unlimited vaccination control over healthcare workers in those organizations, which is almost all of them, except for, like I said, the very, very uber wealthy people who go to doctors who only take cash payments.
Yeah, it again with this, it leaves it always open, and that's the concern to me. Is I would agree with that. You pretty much give unfeathered power to that particular department of the government to mandate whatever they want to. But I think this was, generally speaking, this was a huge win for freedom, private business. And of course, the Biden administration put out a release statement that encouraged companies to still go ahead and move forward and mandate vaccinations themselves, as opposed to him having to force them to do so. But there were so many things wrong with this anyways. I mean, setting up the infrastructure for something like this, being able to keep an account, a record of everything, and then the process for getting this to the administration, it was always a botched issue nonetheless. But it certainly was a gross overreach of the federal government. And it was a test to see whether or not I think our Constitution and the Supreme Court would hold up personal freedoms, particularly in the private sector as well. So for me, it's a huge relief. I don't know. I mean, obviously, in Must Read Alaska, we've got 4 going strong, but they're not all full time.
We're not regulated yet by the federal government. Although I did hear Joe Biden today ask all media and social media to shut down all misinformation, which, I mean, that's an order from the president to the media to shut down whatever he believes and his administration believes is misinformation. So yes, we aren't regulated yet, but we're watching. We got our eye on those guys.
Right. What happened when Trump tried to regulate things? Let's see if the mainstream media goes after Joey for that one. But anyways, staying on the COVID topic, there has been some interesting reports put out by DHSS here in Alaska in regards to COVID. And you and I talked about this before we started recording. I want to focus this conversation because we can go on. I could go on COVID for hours. We don't have hours. I want to focus on the report that was released by DHSS, particularly Table 8, and it's reported COVID vaccine breakthrough cases by month of specimens collected among Alaska residents over the age of 12. And these really focus on breakthrough cases. I want to talk about the breakthrough cases here in Alaska.
Right. Okay. Well, real quickly, they do a report every month. It's from the Division of Epidemiology, and they're looking at COVID. They're looking at a lot of different things: hospitalization, mortality, and one of the things they look at every month is what they call breakthrough cases. This is where the vaccine has failed. And of course, if you remember in January of this past year, in January of from January 2021 through November 2021, in January, there were only 2 known breakthrough cases. Well, honestly, we didn't start getting our vaccines until a little bit later in the year. So
right.
A lot of Alaskans started getting their vaccines in March. By March, there were 119. And that was like 3% of the actual cases of COVID that were diagnosed were breakthrough cases. And then in April, it was 5%. And then in May, it was 9%. Then it went up to 22, 30, 34. We are up to now 42% of all the cases in Alaska that are diagnosed of COVID are actually considered breakthrough cases. In November, we had a little less than half of the cases that we had in October. October, we had a lot of cases, 18,008 cases, and 39% of those were considered to be breakthroughs. In November, we dropped down to 8,850, and 42% of those are breakthroughs. So what we're seeing is a vaccine that is very imperfect. And so it ties back into what we were talking about before, which is a federal government trying to force everybody to take a vaccine, where we are now up to a 42%. And next month, when December report comes out, that will be 44%. And then by the end of summer, it will be 50%. And so what is vaccinated? Is it vaccinated? Does that include your booster shot or your second booster shot? How many shots do you have to be fully vaccinated? And how are we going to do with these breakthroughs? What are we going to do about this? This is a huge story, and I haven't written it yet, but I will be writing this story this evening so people can check into that. You won't be able to link it in the show notes. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I can read the report, and I might do that. But yes, you're absolutely right. We talked a little bit about this and the fact that you're writing. I'm going to try to make this as clear and quick as possible to get my micro machine voice on. Everybody on this podcast knows that I am a big proponent of data, but more importantly, I'm a big proponent of actual raw data. I'm less interested in the 36,000 foot view, which you get from the ADN when they're reporting this information. You get just sort of the overall brand view. So to make the point, in Table 8, you would get, hey, in September, there was 19,891 cases. What you don't get is 35% of those cases were breakthrough. Hey, in October, you get 18,008 cases. What you don't get is 39% of those were breakthroughs. They weren't telling you the whole story. What they were telling you and scaring you with was, look how many cases. And they were throwing the narrative out there. And I said this to you before we started. Man, it was so interesting how everybody were still bashing the unvaccinated. This is, as Joe Biden would say, and this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Well, guess what, Joe? That's not true. That is clearly not the case. And you're absolutely right. And if you go through the sort of timeline of the last 2 years in Alaska, on 2020, you saw a big uptick in cases because it finally, like, COVID hit. Everybody were getting COVID. Then it came back down in 2021 in January, as you see it. And as you know, talk about flattening the curve. In June of 2021, we only had 791 cases.
That's because everybody was outdoors.
Correct. And 22% of those, actually almost 23% of those cases were breakthrough.
23.
So,
yep,
that's right. Then you have the Delta variant, which is why you get the uptick in August, September, October, was that uptick in the Delta variant, which was somewhat effective, but not really by the numbers when it came to the vaccine. And now what do you have? You have the Omicron variant, which blows right through the vaccine. I mean, we are seeing nationally record numbers of people who are vaccinated and boosted 1, 2, 3, and even 4 times coming down with COVID. So the question is really this: when is the narrative? When are people going to go, you know what? This is kind of bullcrap. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. It's just absolute bullcrap. And when are we going to start saying, you know what? ADN, great. Thanks for keeping me updated. And you're throwing that little twist. Well, the hospitals are not overthrown yet. It's because the variants are getting weaker. The vaccine is not helping. And what we're seeing is that now we're starting to see that natural immunity is much more effective in fighting the Omicron variant than there is in the vaccination. So this is vindication for me somewhat, because the proof's in the pudding. If you can read it But we're not getting that at the ADN, are we, Suzanne? We're not getting that in mainstream media. We're
No,
getting a bunch of horse crap.
We get a lot of fear mongering out there, and we're still seeing it. And I don't downplay the virus. I consider the virus to be deadly. I've lost family members to it, and I know you have too. Everybody has lost family members to it, and it is a really it has been a really bad virus. And I don't know that Omicron is safer or less safe because it's new. We're not hearing a lot about it. We're getting a lot of varying reports. I just don't know what to make of it.
No, I disagree. I not disagree with you. I agree with you that I don't want people to take my frustration as minimizing the virus's effect on not just the country but the world. However, the irresponsibility of information from the mainstream media has been earth-shattering. The historians will look back at this time and go, "Holy crap! What were they doing back there?" Or maybe not.
Well, no, absolutely. History is not going to be kind to us on this one.
So when we talk about the Omicron variant, I mean, we're getting reports out of South Africa, we're getting reports out of England, we're getting reports out of Israel, we're getting reports from doctors here in nationally that are getting censored. I can think of many doctors now that are getting pushed off of Twitter and social media, YouTube, that have kind of come out and said, listen, this Omicron variant, it's, again, I'm not a doctor, but I have listened and read a lot. It's not going deep into the lungs anymore. It's staying sort of at the pharynx, larynx area. And it kind of, what that indicates is a weakening of the virus not being able to get down deep into the lungs. Does that mean it's any less deadly? I don't know. That's still out. But I do know that doctors are saying, listen, it has circumvented the vaccine. I know Pfizer's out there saying we're going to try to get an Omicron vaccine ready. There's a lot of this stuff going on. And at the end of the day, I think more than anything else, we want the American people, for the most part, I think want the opportunity to choose. That's all I'm saying. And understand the data.
And we do choose. I mean, I've chosen to go ahead and get the vaccine because of my age. And I just figure, I'd like to live a few more years because I'm enjoying life. But other people don't want to take it because they don't want to be part of that control. They're going to be part of the control group, and I'm going to be the guinea pig, and I'm good with that. But I don't know how many of these shots am I going to take? I don't know. I tell you, feeling a little uncomfortable about having to get a shot every 5 months. That's not working for me.
Absolutely. Well, regardless of that, I think this is interesting information, and it's important that we continue to push that out. And Suzanne, you've been phenomenal at that. But not only pushing information out that we're getting from agencies, but also the fact that right now in Alaska, we're getting information not just from agencies, but from people on the ground, Alaskans, about how crazy the supermarket, Costco, Walmart, all the shelves are when it comes to food, particularly. But we put out a social media post you did on Must Read Alaska. It's facebook.com/mustreadalaska. You put a Facebook post out there saying, hey, take a picture of your local store or Costco or whatever of the shelves and let us know what's going on. Like, we're seeing it here, but is that statewide? And it is definitely statewide. There seems to be an issue.
Well, it is most certainly what I did is I got a picture of the cars on Huffman and the dairy shelves were just bare. And I've been noticing this over at Fred Meyer on Diamond and some of the other places that I shop in Midtown at the cars, that you'll go in and you'll say, just like a quart of half and half. Well, you can't get a quart of half and half. You have to get a quart of fat-free half and half, or you have to get a pint of heavy whipping cream, but you just can't get half and half or something, just things like that. Well, this time the shelves were absolutely bare in the milk section. And so it's not just me. I mean, I can live without half and half. I can use almond milk or something, I guess. But it's odd. I mean, I grew up in Juneau, and I was used to not being able to buy milk sort of half of the week because the barge came in once a week. And if you didn't get your milk when the barge came in on like Wednesday or Thursday, it was sour by Friday if there was any left. So we kind of had things like powdered milk when I grew up because that's the way it was. But I haven't seen it this bad since then, since the 60s. And since the supply chain sort of got to be a just-in-time supply chain. But I am telling you, all across Alaska, from Fairbanks to Ketchikan, people are sending pictures in, and it's the same everywhere. It's also the same down south. It's the same in Memphis and Milwaukee and Houston and Hawaii. People are up on social media saying, this is a normal. and this shouldn't be normal. So it's starting to look like these supply shortages. Now, here in Alaska, we're at the end of the supply chain. And so I wrote a story about it. We had like over 500 comments, and a lot of them were people saying, yeah, I mean, this is really worrisome. So I wrote a story about, what's the deal? We're at the end of this supply chain here in Alaska, and we can't grow that much of our own food. So it's something to look at. And I know that Governor Dunleavy is looking at it. He's got some money in his budget to start reinforcing food security in Alaska and getting more people to get into farming and to reinforce some storage options for Alaska. And it just, we need to become a little bit more self-sufficient. And I applaud him for that, because I think that we do. We import everything in Alaska except oil. Well, we import oil too. I guess we import a lot of gas these days. We have so much gas, but of course we have to import it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I listen, just anecdotally myself, I went in the other day just to look for creamer, and they were out. Like,
yep.
Only the specialized flavored creamer that a select
right.
people want was available. And it's really interesting. Again, nationally, the narrative from the Biden administration is it's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault. Trump did this, Trump did this, Trump did that. It's always Trump. Like, the talking point is, if it's wrong, it's Trump's fault. But the reality is this. We've been seeing this. You've been talking about it. I've been talking about it. Now we're talking about it even more. The fact that ports are being backed up. If you go to Must Read Alaska, again, I'll link the story in the show notes. But there's a picture of Seattle's freight dock, and the miles of just containers in there is pretty astounding.
Containers. I took that when I was flying from Anchorage to Seattle in December, visit my mom. And I took that picture out the airplane window because it's like, my gosh, I've never seen that before, where it just stacked up. Well, I took another trip in January, and it was even worse. Quite honestly, there were a whole bunch of barges out in the channel there in Puget Sound, filled with containers stacked 5 high. So it has really backed up in Seattle, and of course, Port of Tacoma as well. And that is a problem for us, because that's kind of the choke point for a lot of freight in Alaska.
Absolutely. And I know that some of the things are being blamed on, the COVID situation, but also there's labor shortages. And a lot of that is because the forced vaccinations. A lot of people said, nah, I'm good, I'm out. So now you have a labor shortage issue, and of course weather plays in it all the time and whatnot. So this is a real problem. And I would hope we can figure this out, particularly with this Supreme Court ruling. People will go back to work now. They'll actually go back to their job that they had, which the Biden administration will claim as, we've got 150,000 new jobs, which is just people going back to work as opposed to any new jobs created.
That's right. That was fine.
Yeah, man. It is something that's really, really important that we continue to look at, particularly in Alaska. Like you said, we're at the end of the supply chain, and this will affect us severely. We have some interesting, things that happened on Tuesday night. One of the things I want to talk about is the fact that Mayor Dave Bronson introduced a bill proposition to ask voters if they want to keep essentially the Muni Clerk. And so what's this bill? Well, the ballot prop is this. Mayor Bronson wanted to introduce a ballot proposition that would say the municipal clerk is an elected position, elected by the people every 3 years. And so I'm going to give you my 2 cents, and then of course you're going to correct me and course correct me. This is a move which I think is really important, because right now the municipal clerk is just hired and sits there. And as you've seen, and we've talked about this before with you on the podcast, there are things that have been looked at as a little bit of a side eye, a little bit of skeptical hippo, as I like to say, that this would allow accountability, transparency, and responsibility by electing the municipal clerk every 3 years. And I think that's what the Bronson administration wants to do, is provide some accountability for this position and not have it what it is now, which seems to be, Barbara Jones is very much in the camp of the left-leaning assembly. And that's played out in this election cycle. When it comes to the mayoral election, it comes out with the proposed changes to Title 28. It comes out in the fact that when there was the public that was trying to get recall efforts to some of the assembly members, they were just outright denied and had to go to federal court. Excuse me, not federal court. Had to go to court here in Alaska in order to reach the Supreme Court here in Alaska. I mean, there is a trail of crumbs that shows that this this particular position, which has a lot of power and directly affects elections, and the municipal clerk works for the assembly, there's a little bit of, we talked about this before. I'm rambling. I'm going to stop. Suzanne, correctly. Make the listeners understand that I'm not crazy, but there is some actual truth to this. And it would be a good idea to have the municipal clerk not just accountable, but also responsible for what goes on.
Well, actually, in a lot of places, the municipal clerk is elected, just like in some places, the coroner is elected. In some places, the auditor is elected. These are elected positions because and the sheriff is elected because then they are accountable to the public. And in this case, you have a woman who is running the elections, who is wholly responsible to the assembly. And of course, that means the elected people on the assembly are her boss, and she's going to protect her bosses. And she has been protecting her bosses greatly. We've seen it. Barbara Jones has done a lot of things that have really raised some questions about the neutrality of our elections and our offices. Now, the other thing about this is that the assembly made a decision several years ago that we would go to all mail-in elections. And she's the one who's in charge of that. And so she's executing on all mail-in election in Anchorage. And there are some real issues with it. In this last election, we saw a lot of people who did not get their ballots counted because they were thrown out because for whatever reason, their signature did not match what was on their license. Also, the Anchorage election office contracted to do Juneau's recent elections, and 1 out of every 12 ballots from Juneau was thrown out in their local elections. And that is Barbara Jones running, the election for Juneau. So this seems to me that the public would have a great interest in, keeping an eye on this city clerk, which before, when we were running normal elections, it didn't seem to be that big of a deal. But now with mail-in elections and all the things that we've seen. Yeah. So the mayor said, let's put it as a question to the people. And what did the assembly do? They said, we are going to have our first public hearing, not next week, not next month. We're going to have our first public hearing in August. So in other words, they're going to kill it. This is a form of tabling it. And so Felix Rivera on the assembly said, yes, I've moved that we have our first public hearing in August. And Chris Constant, who's the vice chair, he seconded it. He said, yep, I second it. Forrest Dunbar did something that was very unusual. They're doing this more and more, though. He thirded it. There's no such thing as that. But when they third things, they can.
They put it. Hey, no. They put that in record, though. They made sure that all 3 of them were in record.
They put it in the record. Suzanne LaPrince, even as the chair said, yes, and it is thirded by. And so that prevents them from having any discussion or debate on it. So it is the first public testimony on this will be next August. So that's their way of saying, we'll get it to August and then we'll delay it some more. Basically, they're just going to table it forever. The only way that we'll ever have an elected clerk is if the public decides to do a petition and puts a petition out there, and they'll have to spend $200,000 getting the signatures. It's expensive,
Yeah, absolutely. And you informed me that if they did have a discussion and wanted to move, they would have to move quickly to get it on the ballot coming up in April here. So it was one of those things where, they'd have to be motivated, which we know. Why would you be motivated to get somebody who at least appears to be on your side out of a position that is not elected right now? So why would you be motivated to essentially work against yourself, right?
Yeah, they don't want to lose that power. They don't want to give the power over the clerk. They love it. They love the clerk working for them. And just like in that last April election, we watched Chris Constant, the vice chair of the assembly, who was working on the Forrest Dunbar campaign every day. That was his sole mission, was to get Forrest Dunbar elected as mayor. He walks in during the counting process, delivers a $100 bouquet of flowers to Barbara Jones, the clerk. He didn't just leave it on the counter. He waited. He waited until she was done with her task and could come up front so that he could hand them to her personally, so that she could be, grateful to him as the vice chair of the assembly for delivering her these lovely flowers. I mean, that's just bribery. And so, they're not going to want to give up this power. But anyway, beat that one to death, didn't we?
Well, I mean, it's always the appearance of impropriety, and not only that, but we've beat this dead horse. I'll just say it last time. the goal is always transparency, accountability, and responsibility for elections. And by God, they're doing everything in their power to try to combat all of that, which is amazing to me. Just a sub story to that I want to talk about. On Tuesday, Mayor Bronson put up 3 potential candidates to appointees, I guess is a better way, for the election commission. Me Treadwell, Lauren Lehman, and of course, B. Hansen. Now, Me Treadwell and Lauren Lehman were Christopher Constance did almost fell on himself trying to postpone this, but it's hard to argue 2 individuals who have substantial histories in this election within a background in elections. I mean, you'd look like an amateur and you'd look stupid and you'd have a lot of explaining to do. So
you would have some explaining to do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, clearly a political viewpoint on that more than anything else. So Me Treadwell and Lauren Lehman were confirmed. Now, B. Hansen, a little bit of background on B. Do you want to provide that? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, B. Hansen. I met her when she was an election observer for the Dave Bronson campaign. I had never met her before, but she was a volunteer. She was one of the people who got trained and went down to observe elections. She was there on election night, on the recount night. That was the final in May, like the 12th or the 13th of May. And she came back and she was at the after party for the campaign down at the place called the Main Event. And somebody said, are you back already at 8:30 at night? And she said, yeah, Barbara Jones said they're all done. They sent us all home. They said they're done with their work for the night. And a lot of people just went, wow, that's weird. Well, one of the people there was Bernadette Wilson. She said, I'm getting in my car. I'm going to go down there and look. She went down there and sure enough, they were working in the building. They were still working down there. And she videotaped some of it. People opening the doors to the election office and poking their heads in and stuff. And there were actually things going on in there. So by that time, I had gone back to my office and B. Hansen stopped by and to say hello. And we got a call from Bernadette and she said, no, people are still here. I'm telling you, people are here. And B looked at me and said, no, that can't be. Well, yeah, people were still down in the election office. So B left my office and she went back down there. She ran into the deputy clerk in the parking lot. They were leaving. And the deputy clerk rolled her window down and said, what are you doing here? And B said, well, no, I have the same question for you. What are you doing here? You told all of us observers that you were done for the night. Are you guys just done for the night now? So because she challenged the integrity of the clerk, of course, that cost her appointment there to the election commission this week. The assembly, the Marxist 9 on the assembly decided that she should not be. Well, it wasn't the Marxist 9, actually. Suzanne LaFrance, the chair, and John Weddleton voted with Crystal Kennedy and Jamie Allard in favor of B. Hansen. B. Hansen's a very well-spoken person. You should get her on your podcast here. I mean, one of these.
I do.
You run. Yeah, you get her. I got to get her phone number too because she is so well-spoken and really has a great grasp of this stuff. She can tell you the story herself.
Absolutely. And I do want her on here because I think it's just another indication of the fact that when you push back and try to ask for accountability, as we've seen with Barbara Jones, a lot of the changes in Title 28 were all due to the fact she did not like the Bronson administration watching what her team and her were doing. And this is another great example. I would highly recommend, it'll be in the show notes, to go to Assembly Confirms 2, but denies 1 to the Anchorage Election Commission. That's the article title. It'll be in the show notes. There is a video on there of B. Hansen actually answering Forrest Dunbar's questions. And she explains, listen, not only was this an issue, but the report by the municipal clerk was categorically incorrect. It was, as she puts it, my words were twisted. And she goes into that. But here's the deal. I think it's fascinating. When Barbara Jones was asked, hey, would you like to comment on anything in your report that was based on these elections? The snarky comment that came back was, the report speaks for itself. Well,
that's what she said.
It doesn't. That's right.
No, it doesn't.
And no, absolutely. Because this woman right here, B. Hansen, is saying you twisted and manipulated the words. And it seems like, oh, come on. Is that a big deal? Yeah. Yeah, that is an official report based on what was going on. And that report was used to propagate some of the changes initially that were going to be made to Title 28. So
That's right.
absolutely, if we're going to make policy on a report that the Muni Clerk decides to write, we better have an accurate, up-to-date, correct report, including those that give information to the municipal clerk on things that happen in and around the building. So it's a little bit in the minutia, but I think it's so important because it's a microcosm of a bigger issue we have right now here in Anchorage.
Yep. And I think that maybe Barbara Jones was caught a little bit surprised when Forrest Dunbar said, "Barbara, what do you have to say about her casting aspersions on your report?" And then she said, "My report speaks for itself." I think that's because she did not want to get into it. She wanted to kill that thing right away. And he let her. He just gave her a pass, even though he gave her the opening to explain her point of view. She didn't. And he was like, "Okay, that's fine. Whatever."
Yeah, that's sideswipe comment right there. That it speaks for itself. Goes to show you that, you know what, I don't have to, not going to, nor do I want to address anything or have, like we talked about, accountability, which goes back to the reason we brought it up. I think we need to have an elected municipal clerk, but that's just my opinion now. Okay, Suzanne, we talked about a lot. Once again, we went over a lot of time because that's what we do.
Always do.
I know, but I want to thank you. This has been incredible. I just might write on the title, you need to listen all the way through. A lot of great stuff, a lot of good things going on. And of course, if you want to keep up to date, you could always go to mustreadalaska.com. We do a fantastic job. Suzanne does a great job of keeping all the stories update. You're writing daily, constantly, even when you're supposed to be on vacation. You are writing.
I've been writing while we've been on this podcast.
I know you have. People can't see it, but you're always multitasking. Listen, if you want to keep up with stories, again, go to mustreadalaska.com. And if you want to help us continue these podcasts, help us continue getting this content out, we've got a education writer that's doing some incredible stuff right now. And of course, Suzanne is always, pumping out content. You can help us and support us by going to mustreadalaska.com. At the top right, you'll see the donation button. $10, $5, $25, $100, $1,000. $1 million. All of it helps keep this operation going so that we can give you the conservative side of the news and not just have the mainstream Rita creating the narrative, but giving you a well-rounded view of what's going on. Also, we want to encourage you. We're almost at 25,000. We're closing in. Like us on Facebook. Go to YouTube, youtube.com/mustreadalaska. We got great content on there. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. And of course, we are on MeWe, Parler, YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, all under the same handle, Must Read Alaska, all one word. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been a great Thursday. It is dark here in Alaska, but you know what? Hopefully this brings you some sunshine and smiles. Suzanne, anything you'd like to say?
I just noticed we're now at 56,000 downloads, and I just appreciate everybody who listens to this podcast. We love doing it. And thanks, everybody, and Happy New Year.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, until tomorrow, Alaska.